This is the case. These are the testimonies coming out of Aleppo now. People saying, we tried to flee, they wouldn't let us, they shot at us. There are also videos showing people who did manage to flee coming under fire and the Syrian army actually protecting them, acting as human shields. So that's to say that what we've been hearing in the corporate media is not depicting an accurate image of what's happening in Aleppo. The corporate media is saying that the Syrian army is attacking people, and until today, the corporate media is maintaining this, even though the exact opposite is true. I would ask you to follow the voices of people in Syria who, like my colleagues here said, they want you to speak the truth. They're tired of lies. They're very well aware of the lies that our media is purporting and that our human rights groups are purporting. They want an end to the violence. They don't want this war to continue. They didn't ask for this war. But as my colleagues stressed, Syria is a sovereign nation. It has the right to fight against terrorism. And we know that 101 of 193 UN member states have sent terrorists to Syria to slaughter and destroy. So Syria is fighting a war against terrorism. It's winning in Aleppo, and hopefully either the terrorists will accept a deal to be transported out of Aleppo, hopefully they will participate in the Musalaha, the reconciliation, will lay down their arms, will take the amnesty offered to them by the government and which has been taken by thousands of former militants. And hopefully, above all, the U.S. will stop supporting terrorism and stop funding terrorism. And hopefully this new bill will take fire, will be supported, and actually it will be impossible to fund an armed mercenaries from FSA, Ahrar al-Sham, Nuruddin al-Zinki, and all the colors in between, because they're all the same terrorists. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Very informative. Thank you very much. Now we are open to questions, if there are questions. The gentleman in the back.
Thank you very much. I'm Christopher Ronneberg with the Norwegian newspaper Aftenposten. A question for, or two questions for Ms. Bartlett here. As a journalist, I'm sure you can appreciate getting other impressions than empirical impressions from the ground. When you talk about the Syrian people and what the Syrian people want, how can you quantify that? Do you have any independent surveys where you can actually document that? And secondly, you talk about the corporate media, the Western media, the lies, and all of this. Could you explain what you think might be the agenda from us in the Western media, and why we should lie, why the international organizations on the ground should lie, why we shouldn't believe all these absolutely documentable facts that we see from the ground, these hospitals being bombed, these civilians who are talking about the atrocities that they have been experiencing. How can you justify calling all of us liars?
Sure.
Thank you.
I mean, there are certainly honest journalists amongst the very compromised establishment media. Let's start with your second question. So, international organizations on the ground. Tell me which ones are on the ground in eastern Aleppo. Yeah, okay, I'll tell you, there are none. There are none. These organizations are relying on the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is based in Coventry, UK, and which is one man. They're relying on compromised groups like the White Helmets, which, let's talk about the White Helmets. The White Helmets were founded in 2013 by a British ex-military officer. They have been funded to the tune of $100 million by the US, UK, and Europe, and other states. They purport to be rescuing civilians in eastern Aleppo and Idlib, yet no one in eastern Aleppo has heard of them. And I say no one, bearing in mind that now 95% of these areas of eastern Aleppo are liberated. The White Helmets purport to be neutral, yet they can be found carrying guns and standing in the dead bodies of Syrian soldiers. And their video footage actually contains children that have been recycled in different reports. So you can find a girl named Aya who turns up in a report in month, say, August, and she turns up in the next month in 2 different locations. So they are not credible. The SOHR is not credible. Unnamed activists are not credible. Once or twice, maybe, but every time, not credible. So your sources on the ground, you don't have them. As for your agenda, not your, but the agenda of some corporate media, It is the agenda of regime change. How can the New York Times, I was reading it this morning, or how can Democracy Now!, which I was reading the other day, maintain until this day that this is a civil war in Syria? How can they maintain until this day that that the protests were unarmed and nonviolent until, say, 2012? That is absolutely not true. How can they maintain that the Syrian government is attacking civilians in Aleppo when every person that's coming out of these areas occupied by terrorists is saying the opposite? So that's with regards to your question on lying Western media. How do I quantify the support of the Syrian people? The elections. In 2014, the Syrian people held elections. The voter turnout was 88%, including people in Lebanon where I was during the elections in Lebanon, which were actually ran for 2 days, extended hours, people walking for kilometers to reach the embassy, including people who flew from their own countries like mine, which has criminally shut the Syrian embassy so that Syrian people have no rights, and including people within Syria who braved a torrent of terrorist mortars and missiles on election day. And yet, voter turnout rate was something like 88%, I believe. And then the election, the results were 78, I believe. I
think Tim Anderson gives you the opposite.
Okay, I might get the turnout wrong. So the results.
74 was the participation.
74 participate, 88. Okay. Anyway, the point being, overwhelmingly, the people support President Assad. That's based on elections, based on my own travels. Okay, so that's subjective. But as I said, I've traveled around Syria, talked with people of all faiths, all walks of life, and there are people that want change in the government. We're not pretending they don't want change. Everybody wants change. But in terms of support of the government, the point is they don't see President Assad as the problem. They see the problem as terrorism. They see elements of problems in the system that they have there. But President Assad, they don't see as the problem. They actually overwhelmingly support him. So I'm basing it on their choice in their leader, and I'm basing it on my interactions with people in Syria and Lebanon.
Okay, my name is Renzo Cianfanelli of RCS, Corriere della Sera group from Italy. I have been a few times, in the area. I have been covering wars for the last 20 years. It's true that the first victim of a war is truth. And I have seen this in Chechnya, in Iraq, Sarajevo, and in Syria. Having said that, I have been watching last night the Russian television and news. Now, they are allowing for the fact that the media in Russia are state-controlled, and so they try to massage the truth. But what they say is that Aleppo is about to be liberated. They have been showing pictures of Russians, demining units, clearing the mines, distributing food, and the picture is totally different. Now, I'm not pro-Russian, but I live there, and I don't believe that a single line or any second of TV time has been shown in this country, portraying this kind of picture. So I would ask the panel, what do you make out of this? What is the actual truth?
Those not only from Russian media, but from Syrian media, and from people, even independent people who are in Syria, are saying the same things. Let's remember that it was thanks to Russian aid, which was welcomed by the Syrian government, that Palmyra was liberated after something like 10 months of occupation. And how was Palmyra occupied? The U.S.-led coalition turned a blind eye as terrorists of ISIS sped through the open desert to attack and overtake Palmyra. When Palmyra was liberated, the Russians went there and were demining. I can speak on just a side note. In other areas that have been either liberated or had the terrorists extracted, for example, the old city of Homs and Malula, I went to both places 2 and 1 months after liberation or extraction of terrorists. And in both cases, before leaving, the terrorists do lay mines in houses, on roads, and locals or in certain areas, especially now in Aleppo, the Russians are participating in demining. You ask why we aren't seeing this. Well, this relates to the other gentleman's question about why the corporate media, some of them, most of them, are telling lies about Syria. It's because this is the agenda. If they had told the truth about Syria from the beginning, we wouldn't see we wouldn't be here now. We wouldn't have seen so many people killed.